Hello, guys. Welcome to this week's episode of our Facts First podcast. Now, new year, new issues to tackle in our podcast. Now, for today, we're going to talk about an issue that has been in the agenda of a lot of people, especially the politicians, especially since the start of the Duterte administration. Now, what people thought was over as far as the push was concerned was actually revived early this year when members of Congress, led by the Speaker of the House, started to push for certain amendments in the 1987 Constitution in the middle of the pandemic. Now, for today, we're going to talk about this latest push to amend the Constitution, specifically the economic provisions, and also the other reason being floated around, which is the supposed need to amend the Constitution to fix what's wrong about the party-list system. Now, our guest for this week's episode is none other than Attorney Christian Monsod, former chairman of the Commission on Elections. He's also a member of the Constitutional Commission in 1986, which drafted the 1987 Constitution. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on this podcast.
Right. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, first let's talk about this issue being used. I think supposedly this argument came straight from the president himself. We need to amend the constitution because we need to fix the problem with the partyless system, specifically to rid the system of the so-called communists. First off, do we need to amend the constitution to fix what's wrong with the partyless system here in the Philippines, sir?
Well, let's put it this way. The purpose of the party list system is to introduce an unorthodox way of electing our representatives. And it is a social justice provision that comes within the purpose of social justice, of equitably diffusing wealth and political power for the common good. And this means that we have to hear from all the diverse opinions in our country, open it up to democratic debate, and in a policy of inclusion rather than exclusion. So the purpose that being the president is being quoted about, to get rid of the left. I don't know if he saw the results of the last 2019 elections. Why doesn't he trust the people? Because if you look at the results of the 2019 elections, the ones who lost ground in the party list system were the so-called left-leaning uh, parties. Uh, Give naman some credit to the people to to trust who they want to represent them in the party list or in the legislature, because this system allows different people and perspectives and thinking and legislative platform to participate, even if they cannot win in the district elections.
Yeah.
That's why it's a national election, and that's being done. And if you look at the record, it has worked in many ways, right? Like it has worked, for example, in the oversight of issues and national issues. It has improved the quality of the debates and so on. And it is a long-term proposition. We have to make it work. Unfortunately, the COMELEC and even the law that established it in the first place, and the Supreme Court uh, have done the wrong things, and so now we are trying to make sure that it works. The last decision of Supreme Court under Justice Carpio resolved many of the issues, pero meron pang iba
Mm.
na reforms that we need.
You're referring to the Atong Paglaong case, no? Pero let's
Yeah,
first
yeah. Well, the first one is the one most applicable and more consistent with what happened in the Constitutional Commission is the Banat case,
Okay,
Banat
okay.
decision.
Okay, let's take a
And
type.
there was a follow-up decision in September,
Mm.
the angkat petition,
Okay,
which confirms the Banat in a
okay.
way.
Let's look back at the deliberations of the 1986 Constitutional Commission. You were very much part of that debate.
Yes.
When it comes to whether to limit the party list system to marginalized groups and whether to open it open it up, even among those which are not representing the marginalized sector, basically the non-sectoral argument. In those
Yes.
deliberations, why did you embrace the other side of the argument, the non-sectoral representation argument?
Well, I won that argument. I
Yeah,
won
you,
that
you want
case.
that, definitely.
That it's not limited. It is not a reserved seat system. There are only reserved seats for 3 consecutive elections of each application, and after that, it becomes an open system of national, regional, and sectoral parties.
Mm.
That was put to a vote after much debate, but that issue is solved. Now, what is the basic principle here? The basic voting principle is proportional representation. And the basic purpose is diffuse political power. So let's take a look at what's the status of the law now. Does it follow these principles in the Constitutional Commission? Correct?
Mm.
Now, uh, Banat comes closest to it. Uh, but there are, I think, still provisions that should be changed. Number one, the maximum of three should be taken out
Yeah.
if it's going to be proportional representation.
Mm.
Number two, the we should remove the loophole in the Carpio decision that allowed the nominees to be not a member of the sector, but who has a track record of advocacy. Boy,
Mm.
that's a big loophole. And the third is that unfortunately the party system is being used by political dynasties to entrench themselves further, which is the opposite of the purpose of the party list system.
Now,
Okay, so
no, no,
those are the three things that
okay.
must be put into.
You mentioned those three reforms that need to be done, but do you actually need to amend the constitution to do that, or can
No,
you just amend the 1995 party list law?
they just need to amend the law. And then if a case arises, then the Supreme Court will, as it said in the latest decision in September 23, they will just follow what's in the law,
Yeah.
and so the law has to be changed, and the Supreme Court will judge accordingly. There is no need to change the constitution. Besides, the purpose of President Duterte, they say, is to eliminate it altogether. What the point, this kind of approach to the constitution that, oh, it doesn't work, so eliminate it, right? Even the
Actually,
social justice,
yeah,
this happens also in the social justice provision.
yeah.
Now they're using the same argument
Yeah,
from party
actually,
list.
actually, the argument being used by President Duterte, at least according to pronouncements, is that if he wants to rid the House of Representatives of the so-called leftist lawmakers, I mean, the argument is you abolish the party list system. Isn't that quite a
Yeah,
stretch? Because
yeah,
warts and all, there's been a lot of benefits that have come out of the party list
correct,
system.
correct. Yeah, I mean that's really quite a stretch for him, but he occasionally does this, right? He just blurts out even if his front lobe has not examined his thought whether it's irrational or rational. But obviously, this is a spur of the moment. I don't know. It must have been triggered by some anger, and he I'm sure did not see what the people are saying. What there is one other development in 2019 that's good. You must trust the people. Many dynasties lost.
Mm,
Did you notice? Many
yeah.
political dynasties. Reforms sometimes take a long time, and and then we give the wrong solution. We look for the wrong solutions.
Okay.
Let's trust the people.
I'd like you to respond to this because when people look at the Carpio decision of the Supreme Court, they're blaming that decision for allegedly opening the floodgates to organizations or people who are not exactly members of the marginalized sector. Because according to the Constitution, the party list law is not limited to the marginalized sector. Even regional national organizations are allowed. And then if
Correct.
people trace the discussions in the 1986 Constitutional Commission, some even tend to blame you for pushing that argument. I mean, do you think for those, at least let's try to accommodate this argument. Ano lang, academic discussion. wouldn't it be better if we put in the constitution once and for all very, very clearly limited to the marginalized sector? Wouldn't that be better?
No, the Banat decision is already there, right? And that's already jurisprudence. So we've done away with that.
Okay.
What they also did is they say that the political parties who participate in the legislative voting by district cannot field the party list
Mm,
candidates,
mm,
right?
yeah.
That's one way of taking them out of there. Now, then we need the amendment or the corrective mechanism of an anti-dynasty provision to make use to make sure that this is not used for political dynasties to entrench themselves more.
Okay. So
Right?
basically, if you want to establish reform, which will take a lot of time, you don't see the party list provision in the constitution in isolation, meaning in a vacuum. You need to
Yes.
consider the other reforms that have
Yes.
been put in place in the
Yeah.
1987 constitution, including the ban on political dynasties. But of course, that
Yes.
needs an enabling law.
Yeah. Look at this. The congressman blamed the Constitutional Commission for not putting specifically the relationship in the
Yeah.
Constitution. You know why? Because we felt that at this time or at that time of our political development, we had not yet matured. So maybe at that time, and maybe I think now because it's gotten worse, it should be 4 degrees. And the prohibition, and as we become more politically mature, then it can be reduced to two.
Mm.
And if we are attained at such a maturity that there's no need for it, we can take it out. That's why we did not put it in the Constitution, the relationship. We left it to Congress. But we made a big mistake. Our mistake was trusting Congress to do it because for 30 years or more, they have not enacted the law. Even those who are advocating for it, I challenged them and I said, all right, if you are for an anti-dynasty legislation, why don't you pass a law for the 2019 elections on 4 degrees or even just 2 degrees? They did not pass it.
Yeah.
They passed it in the barangay
Yeah.
election or the youth,
And
right? But
the Sangguniang Kabataan and Barangay Elections.
kabataan, yes,
Yeah.
they put it there. They didn't put it in the 2009, and then they tell us, trust us, that we will do all of these reforms for the common good. How can we trust them with that kind of a record? And then when implementing the social justice provisions of the Constitution, what do? They put loopholes in the law. Agrarian reform, distribution of shares instead of land. That's not land reform, right?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to this interesting point that you mentioned. I think our viewers and our listeners need to understand this properly. When you talk about a system of proportional representation, the representation needs to be proportional. Meaning, for example, if there are
Really?
100 seats available and you want, let's say, 50% of the votes cast for that part of the system, you should get half of the 100 seats available. But in the Philippines, it's
Yes.
quite weird. Kahit gaano karaming boto mo as a part of this organization, the most number of seats you can get is 3. Okay? But there's this argument also. Don't you think that would even be more dangerous if you lift the cap, the 3-seat cap in the party list system, given the fact that political dynasties are very much entrenched and have hijacked the party list system? Baka naman mas
Yes.
dumami yung mga dynasties sa party list system.
Kaya nga kailangan may anti-dynasty provision yung law kasi nga it's being abused. Now, that example, for example, that like now there are 61 seats for party list. Now you say, well, suppose somebody gets 50% of the votes. 27 million voted, right?
Yeah.
In the last election for the party list. The total who voted was 46. But anyway, if this group can get 50% in the party list, I think they can run in district elections.
Good
Right?
point. Good point. Good point.
Di ba? Well, I
Oo.
mean, and they can run for senator. My
Mm.
goodness, if they have 50%.
Yeah.
those who vote, of course they can even elect two or three or four senators. I mean, let's follow the logic of the reasoning. We are trying to give representation to those who cannot win in legislative district election,
Yeah,
right?
actually, that was the same argument that you pushed in 1986.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we must look at it if it's proportional. If you look at the results in 2019, how many got seats on the first round?
Mm.
uh, I think only 9 or 10. After 2 rounds, only what, 18, something like that. So there were 42 seats that they had to
Distribute.
allocate to
Yeah.
one each,
Mm.
so that a party that had 0.7% got one seat.
Yeah. Parang free. Free pass to the
Yeah,
party list system already.
I'd rather the one. Of course, there was only one or two who got 3 votes, right?
Yeah.
But I think if they got more, it should be counted to them.
Mm.
Effectively, what you deprive those who qualified with the right number of votes, you gave their vote to somebody at the bottom. Correct?
Mm.
That's not fair.
Yeah, and definitely that's not proportional representation.
That's
Now, how
not proportional representation.
this argument also coming from President Duterte, he wants to weed out Congress, the House of Representatives, of the so-called leftist organizations. He doesn't call them leftists. Diba sinasabi niya, you are communists. But even then, for the sake of argument, don't you think that would go against the very spirit of the constitutional provision regarding the party list system? If you're
Yes,
trying to
it
drive
will.
them away, because precisely talk to us about that, the wisdom of getting this groups together coming from different ideologies, as long as they're not doing illegal, something illegal.
Yes. Well, that's against the concept of democracy. That's even more basic. And I think that the president is looking at the wrong thing to do. He should look at the root of the problem. Why are there people who are unhappy? Why are there people who are protesting things and so on? Right now, this General Parlade had a meeting with, I think, 4 bishops, and he said that anybody who is against the anti-terrorism law is a communist.
Wow.
Conclusion like that, right?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is anybody who criticizes the administration, and the fact is this administration uh, failed, a lot of failure, is the worst performer on the economy and the worst performer in addressing the pandemic in our area of the world.
Mm.
This is not us. This is the report of the United Nations. This is the report of the World Bank, the IMF, and so on. We are the least of 91 countries. 91 countries. Our performance is number 66. All
Okay.
the rest of our part of the world is the first 10, except Indonesia, which is number 28. That's how badly we performed on the economy and in addressing the epidemic. Can,
Okay.
can
So,
we can we criticize, or are we communists?
you know the answer there. That is definitely a fallacy. But of course, you need to contend with that kind of argument coming from the president himself. Since you mentioned the economy and you also mentioned the pandemic, very interesting timing here. They're trying to push for constitutional amendments, specifically the economic provisions in the middle of the pandemic. Of course, the natural reaction would be, is this something that we need instead of the government providing enough vaccines to the people, making sure that the healthcare system won't bog down in case of another surge in cases? But here you
Yes.
have congressmen opting to focus on the Constitution, the need to amend the Constitution, specifically the economic provisions. What do you think of this? Is this something that we need at this time?
Well, I don't understand why their percentage is now, right? It's These nationalist, so-called nationalistic provisions. I think I mentioned this already, that there are three basic principles in our constitution. Basic. Number one, social justice is the heart of the constitution. Number two, no, never again authoritarianism. And number three, that the economy must be firmly and safely in Filipino hands. And there are reasons for that. Now, here they're saying that we because of the pandemic, in other words, a short term, because of the pandemic, we need to invite foreign investors, and we need to change the constitution to do that. If it's short term, why not give them just incentives to come in,
Yeah.
right? Number two, when you look at the situation today rising from the pandemic, who do you think will be the biggest investor when you open all of these doors? China, correct? China, because
Come
they're the
again.
ones
Come again.
economy, the West.
Yeah, the
Uh,
signal went bad for a bit there. Can you repeat that again?
the
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 biggest
one
beneficiary.
who will, yeah, it's China. China who doesn't recognize our arbitration ruling, who gets special treatment here and all that. And because the Western countries have a problem with the pandemic and they have a problem with the economy. Now, I always say that this provision is insidious. Why is it insidious? Because it opens the door to transactional legislation. What is transactional legislation? Let's put it in context of our natural resources. Our natural resources are valued at something like, let's say, $1 trillion, right? Here, you have already transferred from the Constitution to Congress the right to change the limits.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, the vote will be much different. It's no longer three-fourths vote.
Yeah.
So they can pass it.
It's simple
And
legislation.
a corrupt congressman, a corrupt legislator can go to the rich mining companies and say, boss, anong gusto niyo? 51%, 60%, 67%, 75%, o 100%? May presyo naman yan. 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion. The context is kasi $1 trillion hindi ba? And that has been done in
Yeah.
our country.
Yeah.
Transactional legislation. Why? Because the business community is for it, is for the exchanges. Because they're used to transactional legislation, the business community, aren't
Okay.
they? So
Let's
the greedy businessmen, the corrupt legislators will be very happy with this change in the constitutional provision.
Okay, let's explain to our audience where you are coming from in terms of how insidious this particular proposal might be.
Yes.
Because the proposal is that they will just insert a phrase, seemingly innocuous phrase, in the
Right.
Constitution, unless otherwise provided for or provided by law. That
Yes.
makes it the responsibility of Congress to pass the nitty-gritty of that specific provision of law to allow, let's say, bigger foreign investments or participation or ownership, okay, in certain industries, for instance. So ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, can you trust Congress to do that? I mean,
Yes.
what you mentioned is actually happening, diba? Yung elite capture, the regulatory capture that is happening here, and
Correct.
quite disturbing, the transactional politics that is happening here. That is
Yeah.
something that people need to realize here.
And the cartels.
Yeah.
The cartels. You think a foreign investment will come in and fight the cartels and the regulatory capture? Of course not. They will be part of it. And they paid for it,
Mm.
right? So, and then it's insidious because we cannot even debate the percentage because they said no, 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 let's not talk about percentage here. We're just giving the Congress room to maneuver, to be flexible about current events and so on. Let's talk about that. Let's pass this first and then let's debate what percentage. Do you believe the legislators that they will be serious about debates like that? Sasabihin nila, okay, thank you very much. Oh, and then they will negotiate already with the mining companies, correct?
Yeah.
Because they have rendered the constitutional provision meaningless by introducing that phrase.
Actually, Attorney Monsod, I hope we could discuss in further detail the transactional arrangements that you're talking about, because I myself is familiar with some of those, and it's quite disturbing. If only
Di
the
ba very
people,
clear?
yeah, that's very very
I mean,
clear.
media knows it, right? Media
Yeah,
knows what's going on.
even with proposed legislation that are not exactly going to push through. I mean,
Yeah,
a corrupt congressman can make use of the floor of Congress to threaten certain businesses or certain industries that he and a cable of like-minded congressmen would actually push for this piece of legislation that would affect the industry or the business. But in reality, that is just simply meant to actually communicate with those industries or businesses and tell them you need to negotiate with us. Otherwise,
Yes.
your business would take a hit. Simple as that. And here you're talking
Yes.
about foreign ownership, for instance, or relaxing the economic provisions that are considered restrictive.
At hindi ko din maintindihan, bakit kasama dyan ang education?
Mm.
Why is education included there? I mean, I don't understand why education is included. We need education for our young, to teach our young about the values, the culture, the history of the Filipino people, and and who our national heroes are. Why will you put that in the hands of foreigners? We already have mission schools. We already have schools for the foreign, foreign embassies and all that. Why do you open that? That's not even an economic provision.
Mm.
Why are you going to open it? And the schools here already have affiliations. Asian, our Asian what's business school is has ties. Uh, a, a, yeah, has ties with Harvard. There are already ties between schools. Why will you change? I don't understand that, frankly. Do you?
I don't understand too. Pero yun, sige, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, assuming that they are actually well intentioned. I mean, strictly speaking, do you agree that our constitution, which has remained unchanged for the past 33 years, needs some updating, especially when you
Well,
talk about the economic provisions?
okay. Maybe me. I think the one that I think we should amend is that the president and vice president must come from the same party. Okay,
Tandem
that's
voting?
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, no. Yeah,
Not
like
exactly,
in
but
the U.S.
oh yeah, tandem
Yeah,
voting.
yes. Now, and then they say that no, we need this because so we need to open up the economy. For all purposes, our economy is open. Land. Their target is land, natural resources, and public utilities. On land, you can lease a land for 50 up to 75 years. Why do you need to own the land? If a project needs to own the land, it's not a good project because it's depending on increasing the value that it did not put there. Development just overtook that piece of land. What about public utilities? Let's talk about energy. Generation and retailing can be 100% foreign. When we had
Mm.
the lack of generating capacity, why didn't they come in to invest? What held them up? And that's where we say what really hinders foreign investment in our country. It's not the Constitution. It's not the Constitution. It's all the studies show, right? What hinders foreign investment? Infrastructure, skill of level of the people, quality of the regulatory framework, clear rules of the game, fiscal determination, graphing corruption, criminality. These are the ones that hinder them. And the rule of law, right? And our rule of law has been going down in in uh, in the ratings or compared to other countries.
So in
I
short,
already quoted that
yeah. So in
earlier.
short, you're saying here that by blaming the Constitution for the lack of sufficient FDIs that the Philippines has been getting, for instance, compared with our neighbors, it seems like those who are pushing for this amendments to the economic provisions are actually barking up the wrong tree. Kumbaga,
They're not backing up the wrong stick. They have different purpose. In other words, they want more power and more money, and
uh,
that's the wrong purpose for changing the constitution.
okay, that makes it more insidious.
Let's make it more insidious. And there is some hypocrisy involved as well.
And yeah, so if you laid down the reasons why the Philippines has not been attracting as much investments or FDIs compared to our neighbors. So basically, if you follow that blueprint, you don't need to tinker with the constitution. You just need to address those specific concerns, right?
Yes. Like for example, fiscal. What is
Mm,
it? Very big na kailangan yung IRA must be changed
mm.
because it's not enough and all that. The Supreme
The
Court came out with a decision defining
mm,
IRA. They still
Demandanas,
want to
ano,
change the constitution.
yeah,
Yes,
Demandanas ruling
well,
for the internal revenue allotment, yeah.
correct. So the Supreme Court solved the problem, but they still want to change the constitution to put it down in the constitution. And yet they're the very ones who want for shallow reasons to change the constitution.
Sige.
I don't
Let's
understand.
explain that, ano, Attorney Monsod, to our viewers. I want to, ano, to explain the specific issues here. You mentioned IRA, no, the internal revenue allotment. So basically,
Yes,
each local government unit has a share from the
yes,
revenues, okay, from the national
correct.
government. But over the past several years, okay, over the years, the computation or the share had not been considered proper based on what is in the
Not
provided by
enough.
law. Yeah, not enough though. So pumasok dito yung petition, yung the petition that was filed by Herminaldo Mandanas, right?
Sometimes.
And then he got a
Correct.
favorable decision from the Supreme Court. So I understand hindi naman isosoli yung mga hindi na kolekta for them, di ba? Kumbaga, starting from the decision itself, they would be following the correct
No, but
computation.
yeah, no, because what they do, they clean up, they clean up the sharing, and therefore those that are being reserved in central office, let's say public works, uh, for the benefit of certain LGUs, it's only a matter of accounting because
Mm,
now you just give it directly. You
mm,
just give it you just give it directly to the LGU. But it was really being used for LGU. But once it's in the hands of the center on, say, public works, marami na nangyayari, di ba?
mm, mm.
Now, we're hoping that with more money, the LGUs naman will not be corrupted. Because kung makorrupt naman at that level, baliwala yung increase ng kanilang allocation. So we have to solve the problem as well of corruption with greater share of the IRA. But as far as the sharing is concerned, it is already now part of the law of the land because it's a Supreme Court decision.
But their argument is that that can still change because even if that is already part of jurisprudence, another decision by the Supreme Court might change it, diba? So the argument is put it in the Constitution. Yun ang sinasabi nila dyan, eh.
That's very spacious. Let's see. Let's see what, and then you change the constitution if the Supreme Court reverses itself, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a part of the law of the land.
Here nga pala, Attorney Monsod, I'd like to ask your opinion on this because the concern is that once you open the Constitution to propose amendments, ano yan, free for all, di ba? Even if they're saying now that no, it will just be limited
Yes.
to the economic
Yeah.
provisions. I also asked the same question when I interviewed Congressman Alfredo Garbin, who now heads
Opo.
the House Committee on Constitutional Amendments. He was insisting that since the committee was only acting on this resolution of both houses filed by Speaker Lord Alan Velasco, nothing else would be accommodated. But assuming that Congress is constituted as a constituent assembly, can you actually say that no, at the very
Yeah.
beginning we were just talking about the economic provisions. You have to
No,
shut up
the
with other provisions that you're talking about. Okay.
no. Once convened, it has plenary powers. It can do anything it wants. Now, sabi nila, no, the Congress will give them instructions. Who are you giving instructions to? To yourself? Correct?
Yeah.
And if you're a member of Congress and you know in the back of your head that the powers of CONAS is plenary, of course you'll keep quiet now. And when it comes there, you know you can introduce anything. You can use anything. That's the power of. It's like a constitutional convention, right? CONAS is something like that. That's the power of a plenary session of Congress. That's why it's a three-fourths vote. That's needed in order to avoid abuses. But it still happens. If we have the kind of uh, Congress we have now, especially the House, they can railroad anything. So ang labanan ngayon sa plebiscite. And who has the money for the propaganda and the payoff to the LGUs? Who has the money?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
people who are making money on the vaccine, for example, just a question. I'm just asking.
Christian.
Okay.
Did you order food from Panda?
Actually, that same question that you raised is, it's the answer to that is
No,
quite
that's the
obvious,
ham.
because even if we are talking about here of a so-called representative democracy, or even if people
Panda?
can exercise their direct democracy, let's say during a plebiscite or during the elections, I mean, we know how things work at the local level, how money can make people uh, look the other way, for instance. And here,
Yeah.
this is quite telling. I keep asking this during interviews regarding this proposed amendment to the Constitution in the middle of the pandemic. Public support is very much important. Is very important, and I don't think there is any survey over the past several months that could actually help us make sense of whether this initiative to amend the constitution in the middle of a pandemic has public support. I think the last one that we
Yeah.
encountered was, if I'm not mistaken, 2018, and
Yeah.
uh, pre-
20,000,
and
20,000,
previous, I
2018.
yeah, and previous to that, there was this quite disturbing survey which showed that a significant number of Filipinos don't actually understand the constitution. More so, why change the constitution? I don't know whether things change because of all these road shows that they have been
I
conducting.
think the ignorance is still there. And I think it's the same thing with the pandemic. The propaganda of the government praising itself is contrary to the performance. And the people, what do they have information on? And that's what I'm afraid of, is that the propaganda machine that's fueled by corruption money is going to prevail. Although to me, I think the sentiments of our people from all surveys, they don't like the constitutional change. They want the constitution to be implemented properly and fully, particularly the poor. That's what it is. They're not implementing it fully and properly. They're not funding the programs, asset reform, education, health, and all that. That's not being funded by Congress fully,
So,
right?
so,
You know
so
the
mm,
numbers, correct? You
mm,
know the
mm,
numbers. The first 20 years of agrarian reform should have been 225 billion. How much did they allocate? 175.
mm.
Things like that, right? People don't know that.
So why do you think these people are pushing for these constitutional amendments at this time? I mean,
Well,
next
it's
year,
not the
election year
people.
na eh. I mean,
So,
this congressman.
yeah. Well, to me, I'm naturally suspicious about this. I think that once it goes through the CONAS, there will be many changes for the worse, not for the better, because vested interests will come in more and more in the CONAS. And may mga give and take dyan, may mga, anong presyo dito, anong presyo doon, anong pwede nating itulak, and so on. And then there's a lot of money allocated for this. And people may not know exactly what's going on. And given the hunger and the failure of the economy to really support them, you know, I experienced it in Hacienda Luisita when we were
Mm.
fighting for the land. The farmer said, yes, we want the land. Pero nung pinapapirma sila, binibigyan sila ng 500 pesos, 1,000 na we wanted to remain with the Cojuangcos. Tinanggap nila yung pera. Sabi ko, ba't yung tinanggap? Eh sabi nila, at least alam namin bigkakanin kami next week.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay? So this can be exploited
yeah.
by by uh, by the people who want
Well,
this. And that's why to me the way to stop this is now. And that's up to the Senate, because they need 18 votes from the Senate. And I'm
mm,
hoping that there will be enough votes of conscience among the senators to say no. One already I know, si Senator Recto, he introduced the same economic provisions in the Senate. And then in a hearing, and I was there, he said, I'm withdrawing my bill. I will object to Chacha. I think, I
but
don't know if he's,
yeah, but don't you think
uh,
this initiative coming from the House of Representatives is quite dead unless the Senate moves, and they're not moving so far.
they're not, they're not moving. And I hope that we can get the Senate to stop it. because they need 18 votes, and the opposition only at this time has what, 5, and they need at least 7, right?
Mm. Actually, there's a couple of initiatives from the Senate as well, coming from allies of President Duterte. But as you've mentioned, you would need a bigger effort coming from the Senate to actually block this initiative coming from the House. And by the way, what they make of the silence of President Duterte regarding this specific issue?
I thought he was for it. I thought he was for it.
But it's not he has not been making any pronouncements to that effect. Although we
Yeah.
know at the very start of his administration, or even before he started he started in Malacanang, diba? He had gone around the country, and actually people were saying, well, that was a ploy on his part to introduce himself to the people under the guise of pushing for federalism. But that was his vehicle to go around
I
the
think
country, right?
I think federalism is dead,
Mm.
and I think that it would be a big mistake on their part to lift the term limits. Kasi of all the changes in the constitution, the ones that the people hate the most is lifting the term limits. So if they do that, then it's dead. Even with all the propaganda that they have, I think because people don't like that. No? That's self-serving, and that and what really I thought was funny was somebody saying, "Well, we will just have the plebiscite together with the elections in May
Yeah, yeah.
2000." Well, you must have the plebiscite within 60 to 90 days of the approval of the CONAS. So what are you saying? It will be approved in March 2022. That means we'll be preoccupied with this thing up to 20. What about, I don't understand. Maybe some people just don't read the law. They don't read the
Yeah,
constitution.
that's quite interesting. No? For example, let's say they succeeded in constituting themselves into a constituent assembly, and then let's say nagsingit ng lifting of term limits, for instance, or siguro in a worst case scenario, is this possible? Kumbaga, no election scenario, is that even possible now?
You mean to have a plebiscite?
Hindi, I mean to scrap the elections. Let's say based on deliberations ngayon, di ba? They want to amend the constitution. But let's say certain
Uh,
sinister actors come in at sinabi, oh
uh,
sige, let's cancel the elections in 2022.
well,
Is that even possible? Kasi,
well,
oh,
the term ends. Whoever is in power, the term ends, and the only continuing body is the Senate,
mm,
right?
yeah,
So President Duterte has to step down, Vice President has to step down,
the House
they have to
members,
step down, the House members have to step down. The only continuing body is the Senate.
the 12 senators.
So si Senate President magiging acting President.
It's becoming even more and more interesting, no? Pero yun nga, my point is, let's say they come up with a specific proposal or proposed amendment to the Constitution, and then they subject the proposal to a plebiscite simultaneous to the 2022 elections. If
Hindi
those
pwede.
proposals, hindi kaya, di ba?
Hindi, 60 to 90 days from the approval. Kaya nila approvein, mag-aantay sila hanggang March
Mm-mm. Hindi, and what if
2021.
some of those proposals would actually affect the conduct of the elections? I mean, I'm just trying to think out loud here.
I think it's becoming more outrageous, the options for them. No? Kung gusto nila magalit ng tao, di gawin nila yun. Actually, they did it in the barangay election. They kept on postponing it. Di ba?
Mm-hmm.
And, but to me, if they postpone the 2022 and then say that the existing elected officials will continue in office, yan ang magulo. Now,
But can they do that?
I trust the military, right? The military so far has been saying, oh, hindi pwede yun, yung revolutionary government, because that is outside the four corners of the constitution. Now, if they do this, it would be unconstitutional. Uh, how will the military behave? I
Yeah.
think the military, if I am listening to what Defense Secretary and the Chief of Staff are saying, is that they will not do anything that is contrary to the provisions of the Constitution.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Attorney Christian Monsod, for joining us on this podcast. Very enlightening, especially given the fact that you are actually You were one of the framers of the Constitution, and you're very much part of the debates in 1986. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, and that's it for this
Thank
week's
you.
episode of our Facts First podcast. Don't forget that you can watch this episode on YouTube. You can also listen to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and Stitcher. Until next week, thank you very much for joining us on this podcast.